In my line of work, you got to keep repeating things over and over and over again for the truth to sink in, to kind of catapult the propaganda.
Quite a difference between Al Gore's presidential qualities and George Bush's qualities. Just really a huge difference. I mean, you have a president who has made an entire presidency about taking power for himself, the unitary executive concept, wiretapping his own people, data mining their email, collecting their credit reports, their financial transactions, illegally, by the way, and then it appears in the paper and people don't react to it because they're so used to it. There's this constant drumbeat of fear that this president has made his entire presidency about. His entire presidency is about intimidating politicians and intimidating the American people for whom he's supposed to be working. And it's just a very bizarre sort of a repeat of history, but for no reason. It's not as if the British are coming. It's certainly not like the South is seceding from the Union and we're going to be facing a bloody civil war on our own shores. It is certainly not like the Japanese attacking Pearl Harbor. It is certainly not the response that when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, the Japanese received. The Saudis attacked the United States and the Iraqis paid for it because the president was able to abuse our vulnerability and fear and sell you on a war that he wanted in order to create mass chaos and steal. It is that simple. That is what happened here. And so the politics of fear became his way. The politics of intimidating the Congress became his way. The politics of anthrax, the politics of terror attacks, the politics of more are coming, the politics of oceans no longer protect you, and I am divined by God to save you. As if America has confronted today more danger than America had ever confronted in the history of the American experiment, which would be untrue. Now, Al Gore writes in his book, in the chapter called The Politics of Fear, he writes, "It is simply an insult to those who came before us and sacrificed so much on our behalf to imply that we have more to be fearful of than they did. In spite of the dangers they confronted, they faithfully protected our freedoms, and it's up to us to do the same. Yet something is palpably different today. Why in the early years of the 21st century are we so much more vulnerable to the politics of fear? There have always been leaders willing to fan public anxieties in order to present themselves as the protectors of the fearful, demagogues who have always promised security in return for the surrender of freedom. But why do we seem to be responding differently today? The single most surprising new element in America's national conversation is the prominence and intensity of constant fear. Moreover, there is an uncharacteristic and persistent confusion about the sources of that fear. We seem to be having unusual difficulty in distinguishing between illusory threats and legitimate ones. It's a serious indictment of the present quality of our political discourse that almost 3/4 of all Americans were so easily led to believe that Saddam Hussein was personally responsible for the attacks of September 11th, 2001, and that so many Americans still believe that most of the hijackers on September 11th were Iraqis. And it's an indictment of the way our democracy is currently operating that more than 40% were so easily convinced that Iraq did in fact have nuclear weapons, even after the most important evidence presented, classified documents that depicted an attempt by Saddam Hussein's regime to purchase yellow cake uranium from the country of Niger, was revealed to have been forged. Well, we all know yesterday Scooter Libby was sentenced to 3 years in prison. And we all know that that was the result of somebody wanting retribution, wanting to knock Ambassador Joe Wilson off his pedestal. And so they went after his wife at our expense, at the expense of our actual security, so that they could scare the crap out of you and you would give them their war, where there was every reason to believe that if we did it, our security would be even lessened. by doing so. And of course, all the reports clearly show that by attacking Iraq, we have created more terrorists. The CIA's own report says so. So I believe this might have been the clarifying moment of clarity for Al Gore in January of 2006, when in his speech he talked about all the other ways that the administration had controlled the flow of information by resorting to the politics of fear and by scaring Americans into saying, I can't think about this anymore, I'm too terrified, and thus drove out reason from the American people's brains. When you're frightened, you cannot reason. And that's why it's so important to have a leader calm and assure the American people. That is part of a leader's job. It is what good leadership always does. It's what President Eisenhower did. He led, he warned, he calmed. FDR, when he was president on the morning of Pearl Harbor, the first thing out of his mouth was, don't worry. The only thing you have to fear is the fear that you feel. Fear itself is what's scaring you. We have a plan. We know what to do. We've got this. And America had no military to speak of. We didn't have a military industrial complex. We didn't have the vehicles we needed. We didn't have the armor. We didn't have the bullets. We didn't have the airplanes. We didn't have the guns. And he just told the American people, we're going to change direction. Everything that you do is now going to be for the defense of the United States. And everybody threw in together and reasoned that it was good to sacrifice for your country, and it's good to make bullets instead of popcorn, and it's good to make tanks instead of cars. And Ford Motor Company turned its assembly line from a civilian consumer assembly line to a wartime assembly line, and we cranked out thousands of vehicles a month. This is Al Gore talking about what fear does to reason.
One of the other ways the administration has tried to control the flow of information has been by consistently resorting to the language and politics of fear in order to short-circuit the debate and drive its agenda forward without regard to the evidence or the public interest. President Eisenhower said this, "Any who act as if freedom's defenses are to be found in suppression and suspicion and fear confess a doctrine that is alien to America." Fear drives out reason. Fear suppresses the politics of discourse and opens the door to the politics of destruction. Justice Brandeis once wrote, "Men feared witches and burnt women." The founders of our country faced dire threats. If they failed in their endeavors, they would have been hung as traitors. The very existence of our country was at risk. Yet in the teeth of those dangers, they insisted on establishing the full Bill of Rights. Is our Congress today in more danger than were their predecessors when the British Army was marching on the Capitol? Is the world more dangerous than when we faced an ideological enemy with tens of thousands of nuclear missiles ready to be launched on a moment's notice to completely annihilate the country? Is America really in more danger now than when we faced worldwide fascism on the march, when the last generation had to fight and win 2 world wars simultaneously? It is simply an insult to those who came before us and sacrificed so much on our behalf to imply that we have more to be fearful of than they did. And yet they faithfully protected our freedom, and now it's up to us to do the very same thing.
Stunning, isn't it? I thought you'd like that. 17 after.
The Randi Rhodes Show, extracting the truth from the jaws of arrogance.
It's my job to worry about it. It's your job to go about your business.
This is Air America Radio.